the lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I see you in the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. Highway 95, engines on overdrive. From town to town, and in between, I'll see you in the morning light.
Welcome to What Are the Odds with Barnes and Baris. I'm one half. People's pundit Rich Baris. Robert will join us soon. If you're watching on YouTube and you like these videos, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. But of course, we're employing everybody to please sign up at Rumble, the People's Pundit Rumble channel. Also check out Robert's at Viva Fry's channel. And while you're there, right there, and actually now it's right under the video. Join the peoplespundit.locals.com community ahead of all these elections. All right. I tend to try to stay in my lane a little bit. I think everybody should, at least to some extent, right? I mean, to the large extent. So I don't poll Europe that much, although I have in the past. In the United Kingdom, I have polled Russia in the past, which is incredibly difficult right now. Did look into doing so. But unfortunately, a lot of vendors won't supply pollsters right now in Russia that want to poll Russia. A lot of partnerships have been dissolved. It's very sad, frankly. And then also as well, anything that comes out of like Ukraine would be increasingly difficult to do. So we've kind of left that on the table. But Robert and I, for weeks, like leading up to the show, we knew this was going to time with the election for the National Assembly in Hungary and then also Serbia. But Hungary's even more, if you ask me, it's even more interesting because of the extent the opposition went to stop Viktor Orbán. All right. And I think it's even more noteworthy. But I was thinking about doing it, and I just decided against it. Robert and I have been watching, the poll of polls and all the polls that were coming out of Hungary, and we're going to go over a bunch of them. Another humiliation. Honestly, these results are humiliation for the West across the board. You have all of these elections, complete rejection of them and their influence, despite them all banding together in an attempt to stop Orbán. And I'm going to read you a couple of things, and I want you, before we get into the actual results, it's a good thing for me to just, while we wait for Robert, to get into some of these polls, and I mean some of these narratives that were being reinforced by these polls before this election. And as we know now, 99+% of the vote is counted. It's done. Viktor Orbán not only has won, he has won in the biggest landslide, leading to his fourth consecutive term. He increased, we'll show you how he increased from the last election. That is going to see his majority buff up to about 135. Now, there's only 199 members of Hungary's National Assembly. So winning at least 135 of them, he's got basically a supermajority he's headed for. All right, so he took 2/3 of the seats, and he has faced the biggest opposition ever. And the polls underestimated him consistently, and his party, Fidesz, consistently, and overestimated what was called the united opposition. So most of the opposition parties we knew from 18, Jobbik, which amazingly was the right wing before Viktor Orbán, and now it's like one of those, it's a very perfect example of like a fake right winger, and it not really being right wing ever, honestly. They just started as an anti-immigrant. It's like Europe has this version of right wing that it goes back to World War II, Hitler versus Stalin being a leftist, Hitler being right wing. But really, there's nothing right wing at all about fascism or some of these parties that are viewed as right wing in Europe. All right, that really are only viewed to be such because of the racial element in their message. Okay, LMP, DK, MM, right? There was still members of the MKK, which was the I think what they get one seat. Yeah, the National Self-Government of Germans in Hungary. They got one seat. It looks like Our Home Movement, which was MH, did not join United Opposition. Looks like they're going to get about 7 seats. The United Opposition Party consistently polled at 40+%. Okay? 40+. And we'll show you the graph of the poll of polls that showed Orbán collapsing about a year ago. And in the last week or two, Robert and I are looking at it and we're like, here we go. But never to the level, the surge that we've seen. And of course, you'd have the pollster apologists argue, well, he got 53.1. That's pretty close to where the polls were. But it's really not, considering they ended both below 50% in the average. And United Opposition was projected to get at least 45% of the vote. So if you count swings in both the era in both directions, there is no way to apologize for this blunder again. And all of these blunders, forget right wing, left wing, all of these blunders tend to be against the populist nation state party or candidate. Pro nation state. There is nothing inherently racist about nationalism, folks. There is nothing wrong with nationalism. In fact, I don't think I got it here. I got like 80 books on my desk. Over the 60 years that followed the Second World War, before we got into the era of American arrogance as a single hegemonic global power, nationalism was lauded by academics as saving the world from both first Nazism and then deadly Marxist strains of communism or leftism. Let's just call it leftism. Why? Because, as Thomas Narn lamented and Ken Waltz correctly argued, nationalism proved stronger than ideology, much to the chagrin of left-wing statists. It proved stronger. Socialists in France, while they were sympathizers, really couldn't sign on with Hitler. First, they were Frenchmen. As much as Hitler and Stalin really had in common, they do. They are statists. The both of them were statists, left-wingers, despite what you hear. They couldn't stand each other because, of course, Hitler couldn't stand the Russian identity. And on and on and on. You think there weren't socialists in Great Britain? Absolutely were. But first, they were British men. Or British, whatever. Men and women. Nationalism was heralded as the great savior of the 20th century. Now, it's inherently racist. Why? Very simple. Because they know this is the obstacle to achieving their end goal. What the Western elites want. Globalism. A global, fudged, nonsensical, stand-for-nothing identity. And anyone who stands against that gets labeled a racist. Anyone who stands against it gets labeled a bigot, an extremist. And yeah, Stalin did dub Hitler right-wing because they were rival socialists. That's exactly right. And Roosevelt, and then later Truman, allowed that to go on. Why? Because we needed Uncle Joe as our friend. He wasn't a mass-murdering leftist. He was our friend. And we couldn't have Uncle Joe in the same ideological spectrum, same basket, with Adolf Hitler. So we began to separate them as right and left. Hitler being on the right, Stalin being on the left. But of course, that is not true. It is false. They are both leftists. They are both a different special brand of their own form of socialism. Fascism is an economic definition, allows the figureheads of the private sector, who nonetheless take direction from the public sector. The government tells the private sector what to do, but it gives the illusion that it still remains in private hands. Nevertheless, they still control goods and capital and labor capital. It's a very simple difference with communism. Stalin believed in publicly owned, which is a nice little, power to the people way of saying the government owns it. You don't own squat in communism. But nevertheless, they are both left-wing ideologies that believe in government-centered solutions, government-centered planning of society, the economy, culture, the national identity, you name it. So here we are. Orbán, I'm going to read this to you. I'm going to pull this up. It's from Politico because I thought it really did encapsulate everything that he faced. And listen to them when they use the words like rigged, state-run media, propaganda. Okay? Just keep your ear open for this. Of course, they have the BBC. They have European big news conglomerates. But Orbán, of course, has rigged the election. Of course. I mean, you are not allowed to show hundreds of affidavits accusing them of doing something we all knew they did. But they can just make these general aspersions, cast these aspersions with general allegations, non-specific at all. And it's totally fine. It's totally legitimate to do so. Just listen to the words that they use. And I'm going to pull this up here. All right. Hungarian opposition's, quote, forced marriage, unquote, to unseat Viktor Orbán. Ahead of Sunday's vote, the opposition has raised concern about the fairness of Hungary's electoral system. You got to be kidding me, right? You have got to be kidding me. Budapest, out on the campaign trail, Hungary's opposition is grappling with the tough reality ahead of parliamentary elections on Sunday. What tough reality? We're going to show you the polls. What are you talking about? Publicus was tied at 47 2 days ago. What tough reality. You thought you could win. Republican. Less than 3-point spread. We're going to get there, though. We will name specific polls. Idea. All right. Let's remember this. When you... Ipsos, also a very long track record of blowing European elections. They are right now pushing out polls in France because there is a very clear nationalist bias, a bias against nationalism. It doesn't matter, right versus left. I don't want you to get hung up on it. If Le Pen outperforms, she is basically 2 points down to Macron in a runoff, something she could never get to before. If that's really the case in the Ipsos poll, do you think Macron can survive a challenge from her? She's a left-wing populist. Let's get real. They keep saying the right wing. She is a left-winger. Her domestic policies are leftist, but she believes in the French identity. She's anti-globalist. And because of that, she's lumped in with Viktor Orbán and the rest of them. All right, as a country often ranked among the least democratic states in the EU prepares to go to the polls, that's freaking rich. What do you call November 2020? Opposition politicians are shuttling across the country in a last-ditch effort to mobilize voters against Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's powerful Fidesz party. In town squares and on sidewalks, the Prime Minister's opponents are resorting to old-school retail politics to try to overcome what they describe as a rigged system. Is the coverage rigged in favor of Orbán? Are the polls rigged in favor of Viktor Orbán? Quote, "It's pretty hard to counter the brainwashing," Peter Markizai said, the opposition's joint candidate for prime minister, told Politico. "It's a miracle sign of the resilience of the Hungarian people that after 12 years of such brainwashing, we still have a chance to win." You got blown out because your fake polls were wrong again. The West comes rushing to the aid of these united opposition parties. They rushed to the aid of them in Israel, not once, not twice, but 3 times. It took 3 elections. And by the way, they still couldn't pull it off. They had to do underhanded politics to knock out Bibi Netanyahu and basically bribe someone who's supposed to be on the same ideological spectrum as Bibi. Because they still couldn't do it at the ballot box. Ahead of the vote, the opposition has raised concerns about Hungary's electoral system, government control of much of the media, and the ruling party's use of state resources for political campaigning. Ladies and gentlemen, what the hell do you call the United States? It's not even Fox News. Fox News is now state-run, basically. They took a bunch of money from Pfizer. They took a bunch of money from Democrats. They wanted DNC debates. They stabbed Donald Trump in the back. If Hungary is rigged, what the hell does that make the United States? You know what? Pause. I want to bring in Robert. All right? Pause that for a hot second. Robert, this is really some crap. This is really, I'm reading an article that was before the vote from Politico. I'm sure you read it because you've been following those polls. That they basically are saying Hungary's opposition's forced marriage to unseat Viktor Orbán. And they're basically saying Orbán, had the whole system was rigged against them going into this. There were long shots, blah, 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 blah. Not what the fake poll said. All right. Robert, here's some real doozies. Publicus, which, by the way, everybody cites. Publicus, 47-47.
Yeah. When I gave out the bet last week on Bourbon with Barnes at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, he was at 50-50 in a lot of the trading markets. Most of those are in Europe. And I asked George Samueli of the Gaggle the day before. I said, what do you think his odds are? And George said at least 90% chance Orbán wins easily. And that's what happened. And it's because two things were happening. One is this international conspiracy against Orbán that had been building for many years, where they got all of his opposition to join together under one umbrella, where they spent hundreds of millions of dollars to defeat him. With as he identified in his speech, it was an effort by the local left, the international left, the EU boys in Brussels, the bureaucrats in Brussels who were sanctioning Hungary for various independent acts over the past 6 months. And as he noted, Zelensky was trying to get Orbán defeated in Hungary, which borders part of Ukraine. And there are two reasons why populism and nationalism are on the rise, and he had always been and stayed popular in Hungary. But what probably helped accelerate his dominating victory was likely his opposition to getting further involved in the Ukrainian war. That led to Zelensky trying to also oust him in the elections by being critical of him in the week leading up to the election. And it just shows, and this was part of a broader trend. Not only did Orbán surge in Hungary after his anti-war position, where there have been massive protests against getting involved in the Ukrainian conflict in Hungary, but the same thing happened in Serbia. Serbia surged. In fact, for the first time ever, overtly pro-Russian parties outdid pro-European parties in Serbia.
Handily.
Not a surprise, because the Serbs are being reminded of, or remembering 1999, the last time the NATO war that NATO chose to forget, that German Prime Minister Schultz decided to forget about right while he was talking with Putin at a press conference a month ago or so in Moscow. But their efforts to overthrow the nationalist populist in Pakistan because of his Russian alignment. I mean, he announced a Russian fuel deal and food deal right after the invasion began, enraged the West. They got people, through bribery and other means to vote, to hold a no confidence vote in Pakistan. And he circumvented all that, got that vote canceled, and instead scheduled elections in 90 days because he knows he's likely the popularity is just going to rise, not decline.
He's right. This is they refuse to acknowledge this history, though, Robert, which is why they refuse to acknowledge where we are currently, which is that, look, I submit, you can see right here about 2 years ago, I went to the 2 year, I submit that united opposition was never ahead. I agree with you 100% that I think the war, the effort to try to get him to get involved, definitely blew back, and it blew up in their faces because they don't want to fight Putin. They care about Hungary. That's what I mean. There's nothing wrong with that. Being a modern liberal nation state, there's nothing wrong with that. But look at the margin, the sampling error, Rob. They got basically a little over a third of the vote. They got freaking blown out. He rose 4 points from 18, almost 5 points, and he's well above 50%. They got, luckily, to 35%. The polls were, nobody had them in the 30s. I'm going and I'm looking through. I have to go back to 2021, December of 2021, when one poll. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm misreading it. No, I'm sorry. Where is it? No, I thought there was one that had him. There it is. Irantu, December 6 through 11, 2021, had united opposition at 36.3%. That was it. And they were an outlier, Robert. They were an outlier. Everybody else, Zavik Research, 47. Idea, 47. I mean, this is just crazy. Republican, 48. I mean, this is not. Republican actually had him ahead of Orban. 48, 43.
Yeah, there's a reason why Orban's been trading around 50% now for months to just hold on. And I mean, it was and it shows that I suspected that the polling was wrong from fall. I mean, George Samueli of the Gaggle lives in Budapest. Family has a long history.
Me the same thing. He said no chance Orban loses. No chance.
Right, exactly. And if you were tracking local sort of opinion through other means independent of the polling, or just knew the history or the politics of the region, you could know Orban was doing better than the polls say. And what this suggests is that these polls were deliberately wrong. In other words, they were manufactured to create the impression that Orban was vulnerable, to motivate the opposition, to get money and support behind the opposition. And now they've all been exposed. I mean, this is an embarrassing polling failure of these institutions. You got to look at what their media ties are, and it shows how much Europe has spent And I mean, George Soros's pet project, other than Ukraine, has been Hungary because he's from Budapest. He often talks. I mean, he talked recently about how he remembered how they were holding Budapest against the Reds in 1944. It's like, who was it that was holding Budapest against the Reds? It wasn't the locals. It was somebody called the Nazis that Soros colluded with, and had no problems, felt no guilt, as he told 60 Minutes, about colluding with the Nazis during their time in Budapest. He was a survivalist. He's, people thought, oh well, he's Jewish, so he can't be, like, that means anything.
Such a misnomer. It's such a misnomer.
It's a problem with the whole anti-Jewish conspiracy theories. It's like, what does that mean? Like, oh, some Bolsheviks were Jewish, but they weren't Jewish in any religious sense.
Right.
In fact, they were anti-Israel overwhelmingly, Bolsheviks at the time. It was, Stalin cut a deal because the Israelis convinced him that maybe they'd be socialist. But it's this illusion of it meaning anything that someone is Jewish. It just generally doesn't. I mean, it's not like they share it. If you say someone is Islamist, that can mean something. But if they are Arab, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. They may, if you're nominally Muslim, what does that mean? Nominally Catholic, what does that mean?
Right.
It's if you're
Biden,
religiously
Nancy
devout
Pelosi.
and that translates politically that it matters. But big loss for the West. I mean, they all thought, they're all bragging about, they thought this might be Orban's nadir, that he would finally collapse, that he wouldn't have and instead it was just the opposite. And all the media is shocked. They don't know how to interpret it. A few of the same people that love the war in Ukraine are the people that wanted Orban to lose. And they're, saying Hungary should be kicked out of the EU. Well, that'd be a favor to Hungary to get out of the EU.
Yeah, no kidding. What kind of punishment is that?
Exactly. But yeah, they got it completely wrong. People who took the recommended bet last week made easy cash because this was reported early. Was just a wipeout, and and I think it's a sign of two things: the rise of populist nationalism.
Yep.
And its resurgence after Trump 2020 said, "Oh, see, okay, this shows that." And instead, what people are watching, a neoliberal global political order that looks like a disaster. That's economically a disaster. That's militarily a disaster. It's politically a disaster. And you're seeing populist nationalism on the rise in Pakistan, on the rise in India, on the rise in Serbia, on the rise in Hungary. But not just there. Schultz may not be able to keep power in Germany for more than a year. He may be out before the year's over. If they go through with their debacle, disastrous economic policies towards Russia. They cannot afford an economic war with Russia. And then Macron, who looked like he was surging and was going to skate into a second term, is now sinking. And Le Pen, who done a lot better posing the politics, but she is known as the anti-war EU skeptic, is now surging in France. And so, we may see populism rise in Germany. We may see it rise in France in the upcoming French elections. Watching the neoliberal order in action, it's like watching the Carter regime in the late, and you had regimes like that in Britain. People in the late 1970s that were such a disaster when it ushered in an era of conservative, more nationalist, populist politics around the Western world, seeing it around the entire world as what these because these are big deals. Each of these, I mean, Hungary, the biggest one, but Serbia, doing some damage to the more nationalist leadership there in those elections that were held on Sunday, taking out Pakistani prime minister, been a long time populist nationalist, which also is dumb because the alternative to him in Pakistan is not a good alternative.
Right.
People, the ISI is heavily infiltrated by Islamists. It's a nuclear country. It borders Afghanistan. We should be on, realpolitik would be on the side of the populist nationalism, not for ideological reasons, but because the alternative is worse, just like it would be in Russia. The Putin is invariably worse than Putin from just a pure geopolitical standard, even if you don't care about the nationalist globalist issue. But this is all failing. The efforts, I mean, they're supposed to crush the ultimate nationalist populist dissident on the global stage, which has been Putin for quite some time. Right. And instead, the ruble is back up to where it was before all of this started.
I had to ask you about this because last week when this started and became very clear, I mean, this has been a complete disaster for the West. Not only electorally, they're putting all this effort and spending all this kind of political capital and losing, but they took this strategy with the ruble, Robert, and put us in great risk of changing entirely how we trade commodities against the dollar. They put all of that in jeopardy for a 2.5 week, 3 week disruption of the Russian ruble against the dollar. Right now, it's basically completely recovered.
Yeah, and instead they're doing things like taking some of Putin's adversaries. So it was amazing in terms of the oligarchs that have a lot of money and property in the West are not in Putin's camp and haven't been for quite some time. And they're busy stealing all their stuff. So the Russians cheer it on. They're like, it'd be like if somebody came and started saying, well, we're going to take George Soros's property. We're going to take Bill Gates's property. We're going to take the Rockefeller family property. People here would be cheering. They keep going. Yeah, have at it. Aside from the dangerous due process precedent it sets. I mean, that's my problem with it. If today it's Russians, tomorrow it's us, in the sense of, let's just go seize people's property. And that's how the commie started, right? It was always seize the mansions, seize, and then they seize your property next. That's how that works. But it's been a massive, massive disaster. And then of course, it's helped China tremendously. It's aligned the world economically and politically away from the unipolar global order, which is probably mostly a positive. But one of the parties that will suffer is the United States economically and politically on the global stage. That our influence. I mean, this is what happens when you get co-opted by a globalist elite that could care less about America or Americans, is that they do damage to America's reputation and power and leverage and economic influence around the globe. And you're seeing a lot of people do it. And then in every single false flag event that they stage, it keeps getting dumber and dumber and dumber. I mean, this latest one, it turns out
they're getting more desperate. They're getting more desperate, Robert. It's desperation.
Yep. And I mean, the latest one, more and more evidence mounts today that this was, in fact, the Ukrainian army neo-Nazi aligned units who went in and killed people in that suburb of Kiev, and then let the media come in to try to make it look like it was Russian. And aside from timeline issues and photo issues, apparently the national police had been there days before and found no dead bodies. These dead bodies showed up after the Ukrainian army units came in that were Azov aligned, neo-Nazi aligned units. And of course, these people were so lazy, they left them with the Russian food ration bag in their hand and the Russian, white armband on their arm. So they don't even know how to do. I mean, we're literally watching a Ukrainian president who again appeared last night on the Grammys. I mean, it's just sad, us, the people that are propagating this war, but still appearing in front of a green screen, and we're all supposed to pretend he's not in front of a green screen. I mean, this is just it's a B movie level deep state war, and unfortunately, a lot of innocent people will suffer the consequence, including Ukrainians who are caught in this dumb conflict. But the West economically, I mean, I don't see how we rebound. Releasing a little bit of strategic oil from the strategic oil premiums is foolish. Reserves is not going to be the success that I think Biden hopes it is. But I think big wins against the globalist crowd in all three, Pakistan, Serbia, and Hungary yesterday, and signs of dissension in Germany and France, coming strikes in Greece and Spain and Italy over the inflation issues.
Bring up next.
Yeah. I mean, it's the global stage is falling apart because the neoliberal management is a disaster. It has been for a while. I mean, the cracks were there while Clinton was president, but only
it's a house of cards. But it was always a house of cards, Robert. It was.
Obama's second term really exposed it. Afghanistan disaster, Iraq disaster, Libya disaster, Syria disaster, Iran disaster, Venezuela disaster, North Korea disaster, China disaster. Everything was falling apart in the second term under Obama. But now we have his junior varsity team in charge, and we see what neoliberalism looks like on the global stage. These people don't know what they're doing. They're completely incompetent. Boris Johnson might have saved a little bit of time from his pandemic lockdown policies backfiring in the UK. The UK is going to experience according to one recent analysis, the biggest decline in living standards that it has in half a century since they began keeping stats. That's what's going to happen to you. And most of this is not the part of it's being exacerbated by the Russian sanctions. But it was triggered by the lockdown economics that we were being critical of for the last 2 years. You can't shut down a whole economy and society and not suffer institutional harm. And now that harm is coming to bear in the U.S. because we kept printing dollars. Like we literally doubled the number of dollars in circulation. I mean, it was just print.
Yep.
And now, of course, the Fed can. I mean, if they raise interest rates, what happens to the housing market? What happens to the stock market? And that's keeping up our consumption because we don't make things anymore. We decided to be the world's greatest producer. We went from being the world's greatest producer to the world's greatest debtor, the world's greatest consumer. And what happens if the dollar is gone? I mean, because that's what Russia
That's what holds it all up, Robert.
Demon.
That's what holds it all up. The fact that it was the old petrodollar backing everything. That is the only reason we were able to get away with this for this long. And he put all of that at risk for this stupid economic strategy that we said last month on the last episode that this was going to be a disaster. And number one, it wouldn't work. Anybody who has half a brain, look at a few charts like we went over. It was never going to work. A short-term disruption followed by a recovery. He has done a great job insulating his economy from what he knows are our textbook stupid moves, like our go-to moves. And he's done a great job insulating himself from that. And basically I'm looking at some of these polls were horrendous. Macron, being 2-3 points away from Le Pen. If you're Macron right now, you got to be, shaking in your boots. It's over for you. And he's the last one really remaining of the rest, or at least the last one who had a less than tenuous or better than tenuous position. Last week, Tucker said, and it was funny because I'm going over some numbers I did for a client with Joe Biden in an area I just never thought I'd see him get hurt this badly. And Tucker said, this guy is the last liberal president. I mean, this order is over. It's done. And I'm looking at it, Robert. I mean, it doesn't matter who we basically pit against the former president. He's clobbering everybody. And it seems like there's just like change in mentality. All right, we tried it. We went back to what was supposed to be business as usual. It is all a mess. Everything has fallen apart. We should have stuck with where we were. And it's like a national regret. He's not electable. Joe Biden is not an electable president anymore. I polled 2020. I polled all the states. I polled nationally for the Epoch Times, for us. And he was never this weak. Something has happened. People, their minds have changed. They've been able to see a short-term comparison. And it's the US, it's everywhere else, because I do think you're going to see you're going to see some similar shocks. I mean, it's an 18-point win. Robert, it's supposed to be a few points margin, with United Opposition with a chance to win. It was an 18-point blowout. They're in deep crap.
And at least getting him substantially below his the 2/3 he needs for, whatever legislative policy he wants. And instead he got that. In fact, the party that surged was a party that's more populist and nationalist than he is.
The only one that did a little better.
Yeah. So, I mean, it shows where the mindset is that all these warmongers, are, the only thing that's holding up Republican massive sweep is this deep state remnants that have intimidated so many Republican congressmen and House members and candidates into going along with this ridiculous policy on Ukraine. That's increasing. I mean, what we predicted about what would happen politically in Russia is what happened. So, you have people like Max Abrams who are like, how is this can't be? How is Putin pop? Putin's always been very popular. And if this war went a certain way, he was going to be even more popular. And he's already broken records. 83% approval in Russia, according to independent pollsters in Russia. Then we also said economically this wouldn't work because if you understand that food and fuel and what works internally versus externally, And that's precisely what happened. And then militarily, said Russia wasn't planning on going into the West or taking over Kiev or occupying the country. The goal was a classic deep battle policy that would isolate the Ukrainian army in the East by depriving them of supply chains, depriving them of the ability to move meaningfully, and isolate them and encircle them, and then wipe them out, and primarily secure Donbass and the Crimea region, but have the most political leverage by taking out the best units in their army, while taking back Mariupol and targeting, the neo-Nazi aligned units. And all of that has come true, or all of these political analysts and economic analysts and think tank analysts and foreign policy analysts have all been wrong on every single
thing,
on everything. And they're wrong on what was going to happen with Orbán, wrong on what was going to happen in Pakistan, wrong on what was going to happen in Serbia. They knew that they were going to lose Serbia, but they didn't think it would be by this margin.
This much, yeah.
Or that overtly pro-Russian parties would now be their presence would be stronger than the pro-EU parties for the first time in Serbia's political history. So which has existed since the 90s as an independent political unit. So and also they recognize, they were falsely accused of a bunch of false flags involving Kosovo and the Albanians and Bosnia Herzegovina. So when they see the same script being used in Ukraine
over again,
that's just going to intensify opposition.
Recycled.
And the other thing people keep forgetting, I kept explaining to Republican candidates, people who vote on issues are going to proportionally be anti-war, not pro-war in the United States. And this is true for most of the West. So, it's people from history. What happened to war winners? The war party in 1920. The Democrats got crushed. The party got killed. What happened to the war party in 1946 after inflation really sunk in from the wartime? What happened to the war party in 1946 congressional elections? It's the House for the first time in a quarter century. What happened to the war party of Harrison in 1950? Eisenhower crushed him. What happened to the Vietnam War Party in 1968? They elected Milhouse Nixon to have been politically 6 years before in his failed California gubernatorial campaign. What happened in 1992? Bobby Bush, 31% approval he had after the Iraq War, the Panama War, which was not both wars. There were lies to get into the wars. It happened just a year later. An candidate caused him Bobby Bush trouble in the Republican primaries, and Pat Buchanan. Then an anti-war independent, Ross Perot, and on "No blood for oil," one of his key campaign slogans, would, along with Bill, take him out. The war party lost again. Then Bill Clinton escalated military conflicts in 1990 and the mass bombing, and which followed up the bomb in Sudan and the bombings in Somalia. All to deal with his wag the dog Lewinsky. What happened? Al Gore was a pro-war candidate in 2000. Madeleine Albright was bragging about how sanctions killed 500,000 kids in Iraq. W ran on, "We're not going to be the world's bullet." People forget they're Bushes, so they lie. But the only Republicans that get us in a war were named Bushes. As Bob Dole said in 1976 in the vice presidential debate, "If I could count up all from all the Democrats," and it shocked the media. Like, that's how that populist Republican approach is, like Kansas. That was a populist Republican in Eastern Kentucky who was the sole to vote against the Vietnam War Alpha Tonkin resolution. He'd seen war, he'd been there, and he wanted to know more of it. And again, really, the Iraq War. What happened with Iraq War? Iraq War broke the Republican coalition, just killed it. Democrats rose in 2006 to take the House and the Senate. How did Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton? Because he had said he was against the war when Hillary
was against it. Right. Hillary voted for it, and he was against it. Is everybody else? I don't know. Your audio is going in and out, Robert. People are telling me your audio is going. Yeah, I think it's a Wi-Fi thing because I hear your audio, but I hear it sound like a Wi-Fi thing going in and out or something. But the Bush wing of the Republican Party destroyed the Republican Party. For people who don't, maybe you don't remember, you didn't follow politics the way you follow it now, or the way Robert and I follow it. In 2004, even though it was a close election, In 2004, Democrats thought they were long-term doomed until all of the immigration, over 30 years was going to kick in. They thought they lost every single fastest growing excerpt. They thought they were doomed. George W. Bush single-handedly, along with he was the figurehead of it. He destroyed the Republican Party as a viable national force. 2010, Robert, was history. It was a hiccup. It wasn't an affirmation of the Republican Party. It was a hiccup.
Well, you look at
without Donald Trump, the party was done, Robert. They had nothing.
Yeah, well, exactly. You look at 2016. You look at Obama's escalation of foreign policy conflicts, Syria, Iraq, Libya, but particularly Syria and Libya, and still in Afghanistan. Look at the net effect. If the only thing you looked at was the number of casualties a particular county had experienced in war over the prior 20 years, you could predict the scale to which that county would flip from Obama to Trump, because that was the number one correlation above all other correlations. Now, it overlaps with Appalachia, it overlaps with industrial America, but it was a better barometer than industrial scale, than Appalachian background, or anything else. And it's where war is only ever temporarily popular. And all these warmongers that are out there that think war is going to be popular, that supporting intervention in another foreign place someplace is going to be popular, are deluding themselves. And this is part of the old Bushite Republicans who don't realize the Bushes were never popular, never populist, not for any long period of time. George W. Bush before Joe was the most unpopular president in history, even more so than Richard Milhouse Nixon at the time of resignation. That's what a disaster Bushite republicanism was. And Republicans would have never resurged but for Obama showing the world what neoliberal politics look like, and it's as warmongering as Democrats have traditionally been. And so this is people there's a reason why J.D. Vance is rising in Ohio. There's a reason why Blake Masters
right time.
Exactly. A reason why Blake Masters is rising in Arizona. A reason why Joe Kent is doing so well in his district in Washington. What do all these people have in common? They were people who took an anti-interventionist approach. Do people really think it's a coincidence that Matt Gaetz and some of the best populists out there, Thomas Massie, are universally against further intervention in this war? And the number of people who are still buying into this, the same people who said you can't trust the media about COVID and you can't trust the media about elections, are clapping like seals for the same media when it comes to Russia, Ukraine. Buying into every latest false flag event that occurs. These people need to look in the mirror and ask themselves why they are so dumb that they keep falling for these things. If the media wasn't trustworthy on elections, if the media wasn't trustworthy on Trump, the media wasn't trustworthy on COVID, why in the world do you think they're suddenly going to be trustworthy on war?
The worst possible issue to trust them on, because almost nothing tops war propaganda. During collusion, that was another level, I think, of domestic lying. But on war, they've always been liars, Robert, always. The headline right now, I want to read: Zelensky pleads for tougher Russia sanctions as calls of war crime investigations continue. So they're trying to help Zelensky make his case for further sanctions that will do nothing to Vladimir Putin, but do everything to you and your gas tank, ladies and gentlemen. Wait, it's only your gas tank right now. And that you haven't even seen the end of that yet. It'll be more and more and more goods that impact you directly as this goes on if they don't, correct course here.
Oh, yeah.
And then
fertilizer,
secondly,
food,
who's the war
essential
criminal?
resources.
Yeah, by the way, Robert, remember I told you I got the front sodded and the side sodded last year. This year, same amount of square footage, double the quote. Double the quote because of fertilizer and gas. Double the quote from the sod farm. And, that's just that's like one thing, I'm lucky to even be able to get, to ask for a quote like that. So many people are in much worse positions and cannot take that. The cost, if you have somebody mow your lawn, that's going to go up. I mean, just everything, because everything, of course, is energy dependent. But they're trying to help this guy make his case, Robert, and talking about by using, this is what really pisses me off, by using the second half of that headline, which is increased calls for war crime investigations.
Yeah, but
Zelensky is a war criminal, Robert.
Exactly.
He is
and
war criminal.
Who's leading the effort for a war crime inquiry in the suburb of Kiev? It's the Russians. The Russians are the ones telling the UN they want an investigation because
ahead,
they know
do
what
it.
happened there. They know it
Yeah.
wasn't the Russians that did it. It made no sense for the Russians to have done it. That screamed false flag. But I mean, as I explained to people, why do false flags? Sinking of the Lusitania, remember the Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, incubator babies, weapons of mass
Over and over.
destruction. You know, it works. I mean, just look at how many Americans are up there just shaking their head, saying, oh, and grandstanding. Some of them are anybody that opposes further intervention in this war is a Putin apologist and a war criminal supporter. It's like, how can you be so dumb as to buy this again?
Over and over and over. I mean, Robert, you know, first, at least to add to that list, at least one of the chemical weapon attacks in Syria, according to the the UN's whistleblower.
Exactly.
I mean,
Aaron Mate detailed that in great detail. I mean, he comes from the anti-war left, but whistleblower, and we knew it at the time. We said so at the time. Syria had no motivation to do it. This had all the hallmarks of a false flag. And Ivanka Trump was busy crying in her Instagram photos, so she got Papa Trump to Trump's credit. He just bombed an empty airfield. He didn't do anything that was going to blow back on us at all. He called everybody, said, I'm going to blow up this empty airfield, make sure the media is watching the missiles, not watching the consequences. Everybody will be happy. Everybody can go home, and Ivanka can quit crying like a baby. I mean, that was still the most pitiful thing Trump did. He made himself look like the caricature the left had of him as a royalist, right-wing quasi-king, putting his idiot nitwit kid in a position of foreign policy influence. Ivanka, I mean, she's got her little Ukrainian flags on her Facebook feed, and she's the Kardashian of the Trumps. We don't need her anywhere near power. Just stay out of it. I mean, just finito. I mean, he put the wrong family member inside the White House. He could have put any other family member in there, and it would have been good. Don Jr. would have been excellent. But you know, not dimwit Ivanka. She's always been a pretty girl princess from New York.
Her and her husband are responsible for convincing the president in the final days of his presidency not to do several things that really over a year later now we wouldn't be in this position. Not releasing what John Ratcliffe said, release everything on what you have with Biden in China. It is way worse than anyone was even being told in the New York Post. But at the very least, it would have substantiated what the New York Post was reporting, and it would have had no choice but to shine more of a spotlight on it. He didn't do it because Jared Kushner said there's some lines you don't cross, and you know they're going to come after you if you pardon Julian Assange. They're going to come after you anyway. It goes to show you how naive some of this really was. They thought that if they played ball and didn't cross certain lines, that he wouldn't be the target of political lawfare or something. It's just crazy. Meanwhile, John Ratcliffe, you know, is as the head, as the DNI, you know, saying, put this out there. America needs to see this. And they didn't listen to him. You know, so I'm just not clear what advice, you know, from foreign policy, from domestic policy. I'm just not clear what advice they gave him. I mean, the one good thing Ivanka did was humanize her father. That was really it. You know, like she gave good convention speeches, Robert. You know, I mean, really.
And that should have like Don Jr. was the more populist, instinctual individual. And
without a doubt.
She was always the elitist type, you know, that they could use her for marketing, keep her out of actual White House power. Maybe next time you're on with Bannon, get Bannon to start talking about Ivanka, because Bannon's opinion of her is even much harsher than mine. So that leaked out in various books. Bannon just had no respect, and it was just embarrassing. It was like who she was someone to put in front of the cameras. You didn't see like Melania is a much more serious individual. She didn't try to get involved in any of those policies wisely because she understood what worked within her marketing niche. Ivanka imagined herself the person she like a queen. She imagined herself a little princess who deserved to be queen. She had no business being in that place. And you know, just use her to show up at some speeches to say "Daddy, nice." That's it. That always should have been her limited role. Now I think that's and because she wants approval from the New York Times world. I mean, she's pro-choice for crying out loud. This is barely hidden. She was not a political asset in an actual position of policy power. She wanted to do some child credits for families. Fine, let her run off on something like that. But nothing like what she actually ended up doing. Kushner himself was more of a mixed bag. He had some realpolitik ideas that were smart, but it was mixed with his wanting to get the approval of the Kissingers of the world, which was always a problem.
Yeah, and get, basically reinstate the family name. Can we be real? I mean, that's what it was
He's
about.
also backup money
He
bags.
reminded me of like an old baron, the son of a baron, like in like British serfdom. This is what he always reminded me of, where the king like stripped the baron of his title, and here's the son who wants to earn back the good grace of the court, for his family legacy and name. That is basically what I've always viewed him as.
His dad was still one of the dumbest criminals of all time. I mean,
for those who don't know what we're talking about, right? For those who don't know what we're talking about, I mean, his family was, the target of great shame. I mean, his father,
the guy
not only committed them, he was incredibly stupid about how to get away with them. He did. It's almost like Robert. I don't know, like he thought he was in a position where nobody would come after him. I never understood.
It was arrogance.
It never made any sense
arrogance.
to me. Arrogance. It has to be. It has to be.
I mean, well, it's like, whatever you think. I would never buy an address that has 666 in the address, personally. Just as one illustration, right? I mean, that's what Kushner did. I was like, oh, okay, feed the conspiracy theories then, Jared. The Kushner is now out of the Trump loop. He is opted out because he didn't. He fancied himself somebody that, like you said, but with him and Ivanka, it could be quasi king and queen, the power behind the throne. But ultimately, but he didn't like the economic or political consequences he faced for it. And so he is opted out while she continues to grandstand in her Instagram Kardashian style. She's the AOC of the right. She's not some. Can you imagine if AOC was a key foreign policy advisor for Biden? I mean, it would be a running joke. Or if Hunter Biden was actually in the White House doing some political advice, it would not look good. So it was hopefully Trump distances himself from that side of the aisle. He's played effectively coy on the Russia-Ukraine policies. Oh, the war is terrible. Wouldn't have happened if I was there. But he has not jumped on any false flag. He has not gone out and propagated, let's invade, let's get more involved. After all, Trump's position was we should make Russia an ally, not an adversary. And Trump's position was NATO shouldn't exist anymore and we should be out of it. Trump was right. If Trump had success, if the Russiagate, Ukrainegate, and Spygate had not occurred, then this war in Ukraine never would have happened because we would have been out of NATO and this nonsense would have been over and this particular aspect of the globalist vision would be dead. It was because Trump failed on that side to get his policies through that we're even here.
Yeah, and in order to understand that, though, you have to know that was really the crux of this all. Like, there are still people from MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, across the board, minimizing this idea that Ukraine, if we had our way, Ukraine would be an EU Western bulwark on the border of Russia. And they're like, oh, that's not really Putin's problem. That's not really Putin's problem. Of course it is, you idiots.
Absolutely. It would be a de facto colony. That's what it would be. And that's what it's been. It's been, I mean, it's like Zelensky doesn't care about the Ukrainian people. You have to be a complete sap to think that. He doesn't have any long history. He is an actor who was handpicked. He's a manufactured candidate to play the role of president for 5 years so people could get conditioned to the idea on a TV show, and then was elected president on a completely false platform. He ran on peace. He ran on unity. He ran on cleaning up corruption. He did none of those things at all. In fact, doubled down in the worst direction. And the reason is simple. He's got hundreds of millions stashed offshore. He's here to serve the deep state agenda. Scholz, the German prime minister, because he's in trouble in Germany for his politics on this issue because of the risk it poses to the German economy and German industrialists who condemned him over the weekend, saying we can't be stuck in this mess. The German industry will be uncompetitive if we don't have American natural gas. Cannot substitute. They don't even have the terminals, the LNG terminals to convert it. They won't probably for 5 to 10 years. What gas that Biden promised them is a tiny drop in the bucket of what they need. And some of the German people are perceiving this as a way by which China could replace German manufacturing even more than it already has in the way it's done to America, because Germany won't be able to afford the fuel they need to be economically competitive. But so what happens, Scholz leaks to the Wall Street Journal that, by the way, I told Zelensky to publicly commit to no NATO and neutrality, and that I had a deal in place whereby both Biden and Putin would sign off as guarantors of Ukrainian security. And he said this war wouldn't have happened. and that Zelensky told him no. Now, my guess, why does Zelensky tell him no? Because Kamala Harris and the EU folks and Boris Johnson's boys were telling him something different at that same Munich security conference. That what do the oligarchs care about in Ukraine? They care about the West continuing to line their pockets. They don't care how many Ukrainians die. They don't care how much Ukraine loses in the war, because that's not who their constituency really is. Their constituency is the Western grift. And that's why they're going to keep doing it. It's not a coincidence that Ukrainians make the #1 list of individual donors to the Clinton Foundation, and Ukrainian parliamentary politicians and public officials make the #1 list of people identified as having secret assets offshore in the Panama Papers. The people that are still buying this stuff should just slap themselves in the face for continuing to believe obvious nonsense.
Yeah, they're right up there with the Russian war crime thing. Like the Ukrainians, funded by the United States and the West for a decade, have been committing war crimes in the Donbass and the republics, areas. I mean, if you care about Russian war crimes and don't care about Ukrainian war crimes, then you are a naive little hypocrite. It's that simple. There have been women and children wholesale slaughtered in that area for 8+ years. Nobody gives a damn about the Madonna over there. Nobody cares about her little girl, 10 months old. Nobody cares about, fathers weeping over their blown up daughters who are waiting in food lines. I mean, and then the bitch and moan about, the war crimes that Putin is doing in Ukraine right now, which you really don't even know about because you're just being spoon fed what the Western media has told you.
Story that
just like they're bogged down 40 miles from the border. Nonsense.
One false flag after another false flag after another false flag. They claimed Russians were mining the humanitarian corridors. Completely false. It was the Russians demanding humanitarian corridors for civilian escape. It was the Ukrainians trying to stop it. It's the Russians opposing the civilians being used as shields. It's the Ukrainian army using civilians as shields. Even the New York Times and other publications have, Washington Post has talked about. You can look at Newsweek. Newsweek said the reason why there haven't been as many civilian casualties in this conflict as expected, less than 10% of the number of civilians have died in this conflict than at the same time had died by our hand in Iraq. Why? Because they're not mass bombing, because they're not using the kind of weapons that they have. And Russians have some brutal weapons.
Yeah, man. It's just a very unsophisticated siege right now. They're not pulling out the rail guns. They're not pulling out all the...
they're not. Some of these people on Twitter believe that the Kiev is being mass bombed. And I'm like, folks, you can go to there's a live video feed from Kiev every day. The Kiev isn't rubble. There hasn't been mass air bombings of the cities. The cities popular. There's been air bombings of fuel depots. There's been air bombings of storage depots. There's been air bombings of barracks of Ukrainian soldiers. But even
the militarization targets was first, Robert, very clearly. Demilitarization was the goal.
Out of their way to limit. I mean, frankly, the reason why this war will drag on more is because the Russians are refusing to use the same tactics we used. I mean, we napalm bombed Tokyo, for crying out loud. It's amazing what Americans forget. It's like, this
even
is
in
terrible.
Iraq, Robert, even in Iraq. Go and look at the UN estimates of how many people, innocent civilians, we killed and maimed in the war in Iraq. I mean, the numbers range from several hundred thousand to 1 point. Yes. I mean, the low end is hundreds of thousands. The high end is upwards of like 1.5 million. I mean, it's just crazy numbers of people that we forever have either taken a family member or maimed them.
And
we just murdered a family in Afghanistan, Robert. An entire family.
We just did it a week ago, just a couple of weeks ago, or a few months ago. Bombed an innocent family, drone bombed an innocent family. Imagine if Russia had done that. That would have been like front page news for like a month.
6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl.
And there'd be certain people out there seal clapping, clapping like seals for this nonsense. I mean, the people that have got there were giveaways here. Never be on the same side as George Soros, Hillary Clinton, and Mitt Romney. Just a general rule. When all three of them are on the same side, be on the opposite side. It's a good instinctive view. 90% of the time, you'll be right by opposing them.
By the way, Clinton family charities are back up and running now. That's all you need to know.
That Ukraine think about the orphans. They want as many wars as possible. They want as much violence as there so they can recruit those orphans. People should look at what Ukraine is top 10 for. Certain kinds of trafficking that it's in the top 10 ranks for.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is just bad, bad stuff. And the people that have aligned themselves with it don't realize how self-embarrassing it will be. I mean, as more and more, I mean, they're discovering the torture centers. They're discovering more and more things as the Russians clear out where the Azov battalion had been. They're finding that, in Mariupol, what was supposed to be the SBU unit, which is like the KGB of the Ukraine, the CIA of the Ukraine, the secret services of Ukraine, they're discovering a bunch of Nazi, not only torture rooms, but they're discovering Nazi symbols all over the place. So, I mean, and this was deliberate. And what people don't understand is for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, Nazi means anti-Russian. In a large part of the Russian mindset, that you watch, like, even contemporary movies today that were made in Russia over the last 10 years, one of the most common themes is the historical period of what they call the Great Patriotic War. And the horrible enemy is always the Nazis. So to the Russian mind, Nazi means kill Russians, not Holocaust. It means kill Russians first. And
there was tons of Russian Jews that were rounded up anyway. This goes all the way back to Hitler. Hated the Russians. Thought they were a dirty Slavic race. Hated the Russians.
Yes, I mean, people forget Hitler was a racial socialist. He was a socialist. He just replaced race with class. Rather than class, he replaced it with race. He wasn't really a nationalist because his definition of nation was a race. He was as internationalist as the traditional communists were. He was aligned with communists in Bavaria before he became a Nazi. I mean, he tried to hide that whole history. I mean, even you go further back, of course, he was placed in as a spy into the Young Nazi Party, which is another whole rabbit trail of who Hitler was backing and supporting. But he believed in shrinking markets, and it was his socialist belief in shrinking markets that led him to invade Russia in the first place. But it was a brutal, nasty, vicious war, and it's deeply deep, where they lost 20 million or whatever it was. Some absurd number of the Russian people were killed in that war.
Incredible loss of life.
It's deeply embedded, and it's just like the CIA to embed neo-Nazis in Ukraine. They would do so because it would provoke Russia, because they wanted to provoke Russia into a conflict in Ukraine as a pretext to wage economic war on Russia, because they believed that would lead to regime change. I mean, Biden, that was in his speech. Biden didn't just say that out of the blue. In his speech, it said they thought he would go to Warsaw, say, "We will take out Putin," and the whole world would rally to him. They didn't realize the whole world would be like, "What did you just say? This isn't about Ukrainian democracy? This isn't about Ukrainian borders? This isn't about Ukrainian human rights? This is about taking out the president of another country that you clearly haven't thought through?" Because whatever you think of Putin, how did taking out Saddam Hussein work? How did taking out Gaddafi work? How did taking out Assad work? How did that work for us? Did that work out well? How did our regime efforts in Afghanistan work? Yeah. Is it the same group in power that was in power when we first went in that's even more hardcore now? So, I mean, aside from it being, I don't agree with the idea that it will attack, regime change anyway. But beyond that point, who do you think is going to replace Putin in Russia? So some liberal Democrat elite type? No, it's going to be even more ultra-nationalist. It's going to be even more militarist, because that's the political zeitgeist in Russia and has been since we tried to rape them in the 90s. Turns out that they don't want to come back to that Western mechanism and method of power after what they experienced in the 90s. But people are politically, they're not just dangerous in their lack of moral compass. They are dangerous because they are unusually and extraordinarily incompetent. They do not understand the way the world works. They really think assets drive the world. If your dollar is dominant, if your stock market is dominant,
I want to show that right now. Actually, go ahead, keep going.
Your real estate market is dominant. They think that's what matters. No, it's food, fuel, essential resources, real military power. That is real power. What is not real power is the surface, the foam of stock markets, bubbles, real estate bubbles, and a dollar that cannot be dominant overnight.
Yeah, here we are with the U.S. dollar against the Russian ruble right here. And we showed this last week, right? And Robert and I had said, look, you'll get some modest disruption for a short term, but ultimately, because of how he structured his economy, this will not last. So basically what this chart tells you, folks, is that the world had to give him, about 2 weeks ago, a lot more of a currency to buy his product than they typically would have, because it was devalued. And now over 2-3 weeks, that amount of money has increased significantly. So he basically got, I mean, looking at it here, Robert, I mean, he got almost twice as much for his oil exports than he normally would have gotten. I mean, basically, they're giving him more of something because it's worth less. And I really just don't think people understand basic economics like this. You made his day here. You helped him.
Well,
and you did so at the risk, unfortunately, of destabilizing ours.
Internal inflation wasn't going to happen because their essential resources are all internal and domestically made. America was built to be and off of it in the 70s and 80s. You know, I mean, we used to have a currency based by something real, and we used to make things we no longer do. And he stabilized inflation all the way through the time period he's done. There's only been a brief hit after sanctions in 2014, but that was mostly in imported goods, not in the goods that people buy that they have to have. And the other key part that we've emphasized repeatedly is fossil fuels are the key to all parts of the economy because they go into so many things. They go into things like how to make fertilizer. They go into things like, it's not just your car that they go into. And of course, by the way, if you want that electric car that they're saying you should just go out and buy, spend $60,000 to save $800 a year. How does that math work? Spend $60,000 to save $800 a year. Who says that logically, like the Biden administration did? But the other problem is look at what goes into batteries, folks. Some of those essential resources, guess who has them? It's the same Russians. This was Putin's thesis back in 1997. He said and it was, by the way, it was stolen from Americans, University of Pittsburgh people. He plagiarized like half of his thesis. I mean, literally, it's word for word, just translated into Russian. It's like he used Google Translate and went boom. But you go through the University of Pittsburgh. I mean, what they said was real power is fuel. Real power is food. Real power is essential minerals. Real power is military power. But real power is not stock markets. Real power is not bankers. Real power is not financial systems. Real power is not even technology, really. Real power is not the surface of what all of these idiot elite leaders we have in the West believe. And they're getting proven in live time, and they don't know how to handle it. So it's let's escalate the false flags. Let's escalate regime change. Let's go around. Let's see if we insult India one more time, will they come around? I mean, do people not understand that people in India still believe that the British being there is what held them back, not what helped them? I mean, they haven't figured that they remember the British colonial era and not in a positive light. I mean, it's incredible. You know, we're sending diplomats there you're going to do what we tell you to do. The school marm approach of these safety net, or safety, little safe space people that have key positions of power. I mean, these people are idiots. These people are just they're dumb, and they're dangerously dumb. God knows what will happen to us in the short term economically, but hopefully politically, Republicans get their head on straight and realize being part of a globalist agenda is a bad idea.
That's really, and we started talking about this before. That's really what's holding back Republicans here, because when we look at our polling on how a generic Republican is faring versus how somebody that people know, because they don't really know where Republicans as a party yet totally stand. Now they know Trump was just the president. It was his party. So they it's instinctual, but they also know that, he wasn't accepted by both parties, really. So when you ask about him versus candidate A or B, they know where he stands and they have stronger feelings. When you ask about Republicanism or just Republican versus Democrat generically, you can see there's a hesitancy. You can see people kind of, I want to vote Republican, but I don't know about these people yet. I don't know yet. And by the way, doesn't anybody, I wish we would have stayed in the field a little bit longer. Maybe we would have saw it too. But doesn't anyone notice the tightening of a generic ballot lately? It's not that I don't believe it's a 2-point lead. Don't get me wrong. Our last one was Republican +8, but I wouldn't be surprised if we kept in the field for another week or two. It was maybe 4 or 6. I wouldn't be surprised because there's a group of people who are looking at the Grahams and the others and saying, wow, I thought, maybe these people were gone. They lost their influence. How much influence do these idiots still have on this party? Because if that's the case, then I don't really see much of a difference. That is, I can see that, Robert.
I mean, what I've been telling is go back to the 1920s. The biggest dominance of the Republican Party in America across the board was a populist party. It was a nationalist party. It was a pro-industrial policy, but it was a very anti-war party. People.
America first. That was their slogan.
Absolutely, America
they
first.
used that slogan. Trump did not make that up. That was the Republican
stole
Party's
because
mantra.
The New York Times borrowed it from the past. Trump saw it in the New York Times and then stole it. So it was classic Trump as to how he was. Oh, that's a great symbol. I'll use it. He had no idea
that.
Historical. It was like when Bannon said, you're really a populist, and Trump was like, yeah, I'm a definite popularist. He's great marketing wise. He has no understanding of the broad history. He just has populist instincts, but he doesn't root them in a historical understanding. But smarter Republicans would. 1920s is the roadmap. Rebuild the economy, re-empower industrial policy in the United States, decouple from the globalist world orders. Screw Soros, screw Gates, screw Klaus Schwab, screw World Economic Forum, screw the Rockefellers, screw them all. Return to the 1920s style populist politics with national industrial policy, conservative cultural politics. We shouldn't be debating about whether when public schools should be teaching children about sexual education, whether it's 5 or 8 or 12. It's not the public schools' jobs, period. It never should be the public schools' jobs, period. They shouldn't be in that business because once they get in that business, it's going to go AWOL. That's for the family to educate their child on, not some school teacher, not some swarmy school teacher. Amazing how many, pedo wannabes there were in the Florida public school system. They're saying, I'm going to quit if I can't teach a 6-year-old about transgender issues. You got to be kidding me.
I think
they don't have that problem in Russia, by the way. That's when
concentrations of that in Florida. Maybe 2 counties that would really be the same 2 counties who wouldn't give up the mask mandate. By the way, mine, Alachua, and Broward. I mean, that's where you're going to have these problems with these people. But for the vast majority, by the way, speaking of Florida, Ron DeSantis is obviously going to win re-election handily, and one of the biggest idiots will be the Economist, who put out an article, I kid you not, Florida is neither red nor blue, but more purple politically. And the headline is basically that Florida is not only is it not leaning to the right, it's increasingly more of a swing state. Robert, how do you interpret basically a net swing since Obama was president of 800,000 voter registration records? How do you interpret that other than Florida in a good midterm election for Democrats, nevertheless completely bucked the trend and elected both, toppled an incumbent senator, a 3-term incumbent Democratic senator went down in a year where it was the national mood was D+8. Ron DeSantis overcame, talk about Orbán having a rigged system. DeSantis was completely fighting against almost unanimous negative press. Now, by the way, imagine what they would have done to the state of Florida had Gillum won that election, Robert, after everything we know about Andrew Gillum right now. I mean, the guy has serious problems. Nothing really. I mean, I laugh about it and joke about it, but I mean, the guy is a married man. He's in bed with men, methamphetamine issue, obviously. Oh, he would have been the governor. By the way, under investigation from the FBI, he would have been the governor of Florida if, of tens of thousands more people would have believed that crap.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, I think DeSantis, not only winning that election was essential, but he has redefined Republicanism in the state of Florida.
Yes.
And because
100%.
he has branded it with his personal brand, it's surging. Because that's not, that'll be the first gubernatorial election that's not competitive in a while in Georgia and Florida. Florida was a competitive state. DeSantis has made it a non-competitive state. And and also note, unlike Rick Scott, who's going around trying to tell Rumble they're relocated to Florida, they better take off all of RT's, not allow RT to be on Rumble's platform. Boy, what a waste of space Rick Scott has turned out to be.
He what a disappointment, though, because he was a good governor. And with the exception of he caved to one thing, the gun restriction for 18 to 21-year-olds were no longer allowed to purchase rifles, which after we showed his office, I mean, the data was definitive. the majority of gun crimes committed by younger people, 18 to 21, were committed by handguns. With handguns, sorry. But that nevertheless, there really was no statistical difference at all. So targeting these 18 to 21-year-olds because of school shootings was ridiculous, since most of the school shootings in their brief were children who got their hands on a rifle when they shouldn't have even anyway, because they were under the age of 18. So that was the only time he caved on something. For the rest of it, and on all of these different issues, cultural, economic, he did he did a solid job. He never really buckled under the media pressure. One thing Republicans got mad at with the budget, but for the most part, again, it really wasn't somebody who had this record that you would expect go to Washington and act the way he has. He has been completely corrupted by Washington. I'm sorry, I just got to say it. He is not the same guy who was the governor of Florida.
I mean, it shows the deep state effect. You see it with Burr in North Carolina. I mean,
what
Burr,
did they do? What they got on this guy, Robert?
I mean, Burr should be in prison for the insider trading. And instead, I don't know if you heard the latest. Burr's trying to get a primary challenger to Madison Cawthorn, because Madison Cawthorn came out against all this nonsense in Ukraine. And Richard Burr has always been the deep state guy. It was his intelligence committee that was running operations against Trump.
The serious investigation. Remember that? That's how they would say. Yeah.
I dealt with him. The Democratic Council, he hired some kid who had no clue what they were doing. The Democratic Council was actually in charge of the entire investigation, harassing Donald Jr., harassing everybody. That was all on Burr's watch. He's the deep state's hack in Washington. And that's what's happened to these people. The deep state has co-opted so many on any issues that they really care about. And it's why Russiagate happened. It's why Ukrainegate happened. It's why Spygate happened. Do people think it's a coincidence? The exact same people are the ones deeply embedded in this Ukrainian war and propagating and propagandizing in favor of further intervention. And it's like there's a natural connection between those two, because it was a deep state war all along. So it was a deep state effort on behalf of a globalist crowd that wants to have complete control of the world. And the pandemic failed to achieve that objective, because so many people pushed back. And credit to Madison Cawthorn for being on top of it from the get-go. But it tells you who Richard Burr is, that now he's on his way out. He's trying to leverage his last bit of power and it tells you also what the media is like. Here you have a Republican under major criminal investigation for obvious illegal insider trading. The media,
and then also, Robert, though, you got to note though that it's more than just that he was insider trading. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's more than insider trading. He was doing it with knowledge about the pandemic and the government's reaction would be to the pandemic, and then he went out and told the public that all was well. And that so not only did he know all of these lockdowns and disruptions, economic disruptions were coming, and he traded positions based on that, but he made you be the other side of that trade. He made the general public fuel his gains by being ignorant to what was going to follow. He is the biggest scumbag on the planet when it comes to that. Even what Perdue and Loeffler did, don't get me wrong, no good, but not nearly as bad as what Burr did, because of the public statements he made after knowing how the pandemic was going to be met, by government policy, and then also the fact that he knew he was going to trade those positions. Come on, blind trust. I worked in financial services for years. This idea that you could just hand it off to a broker and he's not going to wink and nod at you, get the hell out of here. No way,
what's
man.
coming out from some search warrants is he not just enriched himself, he enriched his family. He had communications with his brother, other people, to make sure all of them could get rich off of this. So he's a deep state hack. He's this personification of corruption in Washington and how it gets corrupted.
He is.
Now, some people had asked what's going on in Georgia. Is that Trump intervened on behalf of Perdue because he thinks Perdue has a better chance to win the gubernatorial race. Got Vernon Jones to drop out and run for Congress. Got the other populists running for that congressional seat to drop out and run for, like Patrick Witt is running for insurance commissioner now in Georgia. That was all done by Trump. We'll see. I get he's so obsessed with beating the incumbent that he's willing to go back into bed with the Perdue family. But I was on the ground there. The Perdue family did nothing for him in Georgia. In fact, they undermined him in Georgia. So, I get the governor's taking the brunt of it because he was the governor. He was doing the Purdue's family's business there. But, so.
What's interesting? When we polled Georgia, it's like Trump voters, when it comes to his endorsement, the only one it really would have helped was Vernon Jones, because they also did like Vernon Jones. When it came to even Brian Kemp himself, well, because we asked people, who are you going to vote for? And then asked them, if Donald Trump endorses so-and-so, then then who would you vote for? We were testing the power of Trump's endorsement. And with Vernon Jones, it was good for a 50-point net swing. For Brian Kemp, it was good for like nothing, Robert, because people were basically saying, when it came to Purdue and Kemp, they were basically saying, you know what, we love you, but with all due respect, we hate these two guys. And we're just not going to, even with your support, we're still going to go somewhere else. That's it. So Purdue, by the way, is another very typical lazy piece of crap, entitled piece of crap, who thinks that he gets Trump's endorsement and then just sits on his butt and he's going to cruise to victory with Trump's endorsement. There are so many of these this cycle, Robert. It's and because I know I actually have some knowledge of this, the system for getting the president's endorsement is not good at all. That's how you ended up with the endorsement of Morgan.
He's mangled it. Mo Brooks was already sinking when he pulled back from Mo Brooks, but a couple of things are clear with Trump's endorsements. One is at this stage that he only wants to endorse someone he thinks he's going to win. And that makes him, it reminds me of Earl Long's statement. This legislator came up to Earl Long and said, Earl, I'm with you when you're right, but I can't be with you when you're wrong.
right.
And Earl said, you dumb SOB, I only need you when I'm wrong. So the point is that if Trump wants to have leverage, he needs to make good choices, number one. Number two, make them early enough when the race is undecided so that people think he dictated the outcome. When he's just a bandwagon guy, and that's what he is in 90% of these cases, he's a bandwagon guy, people don't take his endorsement seriously. It's like, okay, whatever. The other problem is when he endorses people that have a history of opposing him, then people are like, oh, you can. I told people in D.C., if you want to get Trump's attention or you want to get Trump to put you in a position of power, don't fight for him. Go up and smack him in the face, and he'll drop on his knees and beg you to give you a job, because that's what he did. He gave his adversaries tons of key positions. Ken Cuccinelli, this is a guy who's on the Republican National Convention floor, tearing up his Republican card to criticize Trump for national publicity, and Trump gave him a prime gig near the White House, while people who fought for him throughout the campaign, he gave nothing to. If he doesn't learn to change that lesson, then he could become increasingly vulnerable to a DeSantis-type challenge, because what DeSantis is showing is this is how you can govern, and quite frankly, he's governed a lot better as governor than Trump did as president.
It's people too who he surrounded himself with. There were some people that were giving him a problem. They quickly lost influence in his circle. Quickly lost it. Look, I just spoke to him a couple of weeks ago when I was giving the Hillsdale speech. He was the keynote, and he really did. He didn't vibe as a politician at all, and really everybody wanted to know why it is that he is doing these things and other people are not. Robert, I'll tell you what, man, he told us, because it's like a red state like Utah will cave. Meanwhile, he's governing what everyone thought was a razor thin state, and he's doing it and just crushing it. Right. And he's just like, looks at you and he's like, you know what? I just don't give a damn what they print about me. It's that simple. I know what people want. I know what people support. And I know what's right. Like Fauci, perfect example. Which that guy can't stand Dr. Fauci. He cannot stand him. He thinks he really should. He flatly told me he thinks he should be imprisoned. Like, he's a dangerous man who needs to go to jail. And I just was like, this guy's going to win in a landslide, because he just doesn't care. He doesn't give a damn. But he said, they're good people. He knows a lot of them, serves with some of them in Congress, certainly has a lot of friends that he knows they agree with him, but they care too much about what is in Politico. They care too much about what's written in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. He just doesn't give a damn. He says, I never read it. He's like, I don't read it. I just don't. I don't care. I'm too busy doing my damn job, he said. Like he's a hoot, man.
It's what Pat Buchanan wrote about about Nixon. He said Nixon was obsessed with the New York Times and didn't understand or undervalued that personnel is policy, and that's why so much of the populist side of Nixon never got implemented from a policy perspective. And it's not a coincidence Buchanan wrote this book and published it right after Trump got elected.
When Trump was in
office for everybody, this is what Trump is going to do. Trump is still obsessed with the New York Times. It's like, quit reading the New York Times. Quit caring what it's on Chuck Todd on NBC. Nobody else cares. They just ignore all of that. He should look to what DeSantis is doing and say, I should emulate more of that. I should replicate more of that. He should have some of DeSantis's people around him for presidential campaign purposes.
Without a doubt.
And instead of the crew he's got currently. Because, he's still got the best instincts in all of politics. He's still got the best marketing skills of anybody in politics. But he's had terrible personnel choices, and he needs an architect to translate his instincts into substantive policy, which is all about ultimately personnel. And that's a place where he is yet to show improvement.
And Robert, I think you'd agree. That's what really where the bumps in the road, whatever you call them, but really where he started to veer off the track. They successfully took out Flynn, which I think Flynn really showed himself to be quite naive. I really do. So, if someone was going to be that naive, he shouldn't have been
definite hindrances. But once the system knew they could take him out. We said at the time that Pence was risky. And Coulter said at the time that he picked Pence that it was risky. Said Pence is a neocon at heart if you studied his congressional history. And then Trump's like shocked. Oh, Pence all along was, of course, Pence was the one helping to orchestrate the coup against Flynn. Sometimes Trump comes across as an idiot when it comes to policy, personnel. It's like, how did you miss this? It's because his ego blinds him, and he wants to, and he likes to be liked. And so consequently, he assumes things about people on the opposite side that are just not true, unless he's in overt competition with them. And when he's in overt competition, his IQ goes through the roof. When he's not, his skill set drops through the cellar. And he's got to
for Condoleezza Rice. Rex Tillerson was because he wanted Condoleezza Rice to be nice to him, basically, or at least he was trying to extend an olive branch, to some of these people. And somebody should have told him right off the bat, and I'm sure Steve did. I know Bannon. I don't know how the hell Bannon couldn't have been that guy as the chief strategist, White House advisor, to be in the president's ears going, you cannot trust these people. But by the time George W. walks into the White House and begs him to hire Bill Barr as the attorney general, Bannon was long gone. You know what I'm saying? So all of these people.
Why back Romney to run the Republican National Committee? Here's another example to bridge into another topic.
Because he won Michigan. That's why.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. The Romney name means nothing in Michigan. If it did, Mitt Romney wouldn't have got crushed by Obama in Michigan.
Killed.
But he had this sort of, the old man was governor there once, so on and so forth. He was also part of the Yankee liberal establishment that tried to be president himself and got crushed by Richard Milhouse Nixon, running on a populist platform to outmaneuver him. He thought he could win over the growing Black Power movement. That's how dumb Romney's dad was. He thought it was a Poppy Bush story. You born on third base and think you hit a triple, to quote Ann Richards. But keeping her in that position, like here during the campaign, he turns over his whole campaign to the Republican National Committee. They sabotage it at multiple levels, particularly on the election law front. And then look at all the money they
claim
raised.
They were winning, and claim they were winning, which was what was driving me nuts at the time. I'd watch Ronna McDaniel like, big victory in Wisconsin. What are you talking about? They're going to wind up writing in a bunch of indefinitely confined. Change of address flags are going to be coming out your ears. What are you talking? And by the way, here we are.
Yeah, right? And they paid no attention to all that, hired compromised lawyers and counsel who were doing a poor job afterwards. She gave she's the one who blocked me and a group of other people from taking over the election campaign litigation. And Jenna Ellis has now gone public with saying that what happened was she raised over $300 million in the name of election reform and didn't spend a penny on it. It was it was one of the biggest grifts and frauds in the history of campaign fundraising. And look at what's happening right now, to bridge into a current topic. You have a Supreme Court nominee who gave light sentences to child rapists, who glamorized violence, sexual violence against babies, against infants, and she gave them a light sentence. And the RNC is currently raising money on the grounds of opposing her, and they're not spending any of it to oppose her. Where's the massive social media campaign against her? Where's the marketing campaign against her? Where's the advertising campaign against her? Where's the campaign in key states? Make sure Mitt Romney knows if he still has delusions of being president that he has to be a no vote. I mean, right now it's I get you might not be able to push Susan Collins, but you could have pushed a lot of other people. You could have pushed Manchin even in West Virginia to reconsider. And instead, they're raising money as if they're fighting her, and they're not, in fact, fighting her. So now we're going to get
Collins, though,
another Sotomayor on the bench.
Susan Collins is like portrayed as some kind of politically shrewd person because she survived this reelection. She completely took the wrong lesson. She survived that election because she stood firm on certain base issues. She did not survive by appeasing people. They went after her over Kavanaugh like she was, sitting in the back alley with the coat hanger herself, and it did not work. She doesn't seem to understand you're never going to win the first congressional district. You better run up that margin in the second congressional district. I mean, make it tighter if you can in the first, but that's not how you won the state of Maine, Susan, by caving to people like this.
The first district is where Stephen King lives. The second district is where Stephen King's characters live. That's right. Right.
It's like Stephen King's home versus Haven, the mythical town of Haven. Exactly. I don't get these people, the Murkowskis and by the way, somebody did have a question about Palin, and Trump did endorse Palin. Of course he did. She was one of the first ones to endorse Donald Trump when he came out. It was a big
and I get Palin running. Why didn't she run, do you think, for the Senate? I thought she made sense challenging Murkowski because that would be a great old fight.
It's a step down, man.
What was it?
It's a step down. I really thought.
Agreed. Well, why do you think she didn't go for the Senate?
Honestly, when I read her press release, that was the first question that jumped in my head. What the hell are you doing? I do know some of the backstory of what happened with Joe Miller, and maybe she feared something similar would happen to her, defeat Murkowski easily in a primary, but then ultimately lose because what happened even though people constantly deny this, I've seen the emails myself. Karl Rove got together with the Democrats and they sabotaged Joe Miller. They sent Karl Rove himself called Joe Miller and said, I'm sending
like he's doing to Eric Greitens in Missouri right now.
Exactly. But what he's really is sabotaging. That's what he does. Like he sends in these people that are supposed to be the pros that are going to carry you over the finish line. In the end, they destroyed intentionally Joe Miller's campaign, and they were working with the Democrats to basically they just kind of cut the Democratic nominee loose and said, we're going to back Murkowski's write-in campaign. She didn't win Republican votes. Those were some Republican, but that was the Democratic Party basically giving up. And if you can split the Republican base and no votes go to the Democrat, I mean, go look at how many votes the Democrat got in that election. He got like 20%. That's it. That's because the other 20 went to Murkowski. So, or 22 or something like that.
I assume that's her. Now, is she running as an independent this time or running within the Republican primary?
No. You know what? That's a good question. I thought she was running as a Republican.
I saw polls seeing her beat, but I was like, is that polls in the general? Because, I mean, she wouldn't win the Republican primary. She would lose that again. But it would just be the question was, could she repeat what she did last time? I mean, I thought Palin versus Murkowski would have been a great
look at the filing.
Say again?
I'm going to look at the filing.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah.
I mean, Palin versus Murkowski because it would have had Palin's comeback. Murkowski, a big anti-Trumper. The history of Palin versus the Murkowskis in Alaska. The Murkowskis part of an old, corrupt political machine. Though her dad was set up and the charges against him didn't change the fact he was also independently corrupt. But I thought there was a lot more angle to that than Palin just being in Congress, in the House. I guess it was a deference to who is the prominent Republican challenging her. My understanding is that her Republican challenger is leading her, but I didn't know if that was in the primary or the general election.
Yeah, I'm looking right now at she's not on the thing yet. I guess her paperwork hasn't gone through. But let's look and see I'll look up the poll aggregates and see who is, let's go. I'll just do general. I'm gonna look at the general first and see if I can find it in the general election polls. Looks like Kelly leads Murkowski in. This was about a week ago. This poll. It leads in the Alaska Senate race. Okay, so she's the former Department of Administration Commissioner Kelly Tshaba. Is her name? If I said that right. If I didn't, my bad. But she's the only, actually, she has a shot to get over 50 in the 4-way field in November, because it's, they do nonpartisan primaries. Here we go. So 500 likely voters in the first round. She has a huge lead, blah, 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 45.4% to 28.7%. With Murkowski, and then they're like a jungle over there. So the generic Democrat is close behind Murkowski, a little, with 20, looks like 25%. The Libertarians in
ideal scenarios, Murkowski isn't in that runoff.
Yeah. This was done by Signal, and I got to tell you, Signal, they are a Republican polling firm, but they're decent. Our numbers are very close to each other. We had almost identical numbers in Virginia, which was pretty incredible. But they put out, this is from Scripted. They uploaded this. Yeah, this is going to be first round choice. Kelly may get over 50 in the first round. If that's the case, then that's a wrap. So
that'd be nice for Murkowski to be gone. There's none of these fake Republicans, particularly from a state like Alaska. Like, I get Susan Collins.
Outrageous.
Susan Collins is, one in a Democratic state. So, that gives her some political leeway. But to have these never Trumpers from Utah like Mitt Romney, to have never Trumpers from Alaska like Murkowski, that's where it's inexcusable.
There's no comparable lawmaker on the Democratic side like that, Robert. Like, the Democrats don't have
the closest
that
you have is Manchin. And I mean, that's because he's in a state. Well, West Virginia voted for Trump by 30.
Yeah.
What was it? Yeah, I mean,
more.
So, I mean, it's not like he's got a real choice if he 32? Wants a future in West Virginia.
Yeah, and there it is. So,
I mean, Manchin almost lost in 2018 in one of the most pro-democratic environments in history.
Yeah, if it was this year, I think he would not survive.
I agree.
If it was, he would. Neither would Tester, by the way. John Tester in Montana.
I was estimating that it's going to be a Republican sweep about 50 seats, but I was waiting to see how redistricting shook out, and that they would definitely take back the Senate. And the only question is how many seats they would take in the Senate. And that also depends on certain individual races, like New Hampshire. We have to, been more competitive, but I guess Sununu's going to wuss out again.
Yeah, he is. He did, and I know that
he's too busy taking that Russian vodka off the liquor stores. Ha ha ha!
I know, he's an idiot.
Just like his old man.
Trump pushed him because apparently they get along. I know that like they've had. He likes Sununu, and Sununu apparently likes him. I was like pretty shocked to hear that. But basically, there's weak bench out there in New Hampshire, but there are some surprises like Laxalt. I've seen multiple internal polls and polls done by
Nevada,
the Democratic group. It is
the
shifting,
Latino vote. Now, it's tough to poll Nevada, one of the few states that have tended to overestimate Republican because of the Asian vote is here. Tends to be a 2-to-1 Democratic vote here. Heavy population in Nevada but they're middle class. So the key is how movement do we continue to make and work Mexican American votes? And how much do we can make inroads? I think Republicans are going to take back the governorship. May take back at least legislative chambers. Laxalt's an instinctive populist. I've talked to him a couple of times, and so if he hammering home on populist issues popular in Nevada, then he definitely win.
Yeah, I was shocked. I think there was a Democratic leaning firm I saw had Laxalt up by like 6. They didn't publish their results, but I'm not surprised. They held that one back. And then there were 2 internals and both had Laxalt up. So I was like really shocked. Now, there is a trick with Nevada, and you remember this in 18 when we were polling Nevada for the election projection model. You have got, as a Republican, you have got to clear this hurdle with independents in double digits because not all of you are going to perform like Donald Trump and like Douglas and Elk. You're just not going to squeeze that kind of rural vote. Not every Republican can do that like Donald Trump can. So you have to tighten Washoe. And
The other
that's the
key is
problem.
in the election rules too, because normally off-years, low Democratic turnout in Nevada. That's what happened in 2010.
Yeah.
It happened again in 2014. 20 wasn't as bad. They have real loose signature requirements and real loose balloting because Democrats control state machinery top to bottom. And then that might be in 2022. Laxalt was fighting the election problems from the get-go. His family political history in Nevada. But I think it depends. And I think ultimately Biden, quote unquote, won Nevada by 2 points.
Yeah,
Two
but
and a
almost
half.
3 when all of them
Almost.
started to roll in. Yeah.
When they kept just coming in.
Just kept coming in.
Yep, just like dollars going out of the old casino doors to the boys in Kansas City and Milwaukee. But it's just in inverse. And for people who don't know, a journalist in Nevada showed how the ballot signature required that they made automated was a joke because he did 8 completely different signatures, sent them in, and they affirmed all of them as being legitimate.
Of course. Of course. I mean,
and Laxalt was pushing that issue early. But if you look at it, if there is what we're looking at right now is about an 11-point swing if it's a generic ballot goes Republican by 8 from the 2020 results. So if we have basically, you would just need about a 3-4 point swing from the Biden vote for Laxalt to win. And I think, and when you look at the demographics, there's not a big professional class group here. Black voters tend not to vote in off-year elections, so that's why they need the mail-in balloting to gin that up. I would think Laxalt. My money right now would be on Laxalt to win in Nevada. My money is also on Masters to beat Kelly in Arizona.
Yeah, I think too. Vance is popping at the right time. I think Mandel, all of them.
Whoever gets nominated out of the Republican Party is definitely going to hold Portman seat in Ohio.
Oh yeah,
that Ohio is gone for the Democrats.
Yeah, I think that Brown is on borrowed time. Renacci, whatever. You just didn't have the juice in 18. But that's the thing with Mandel that always, gave me a little hesitancy. I pulled that race. I know Josh Mandel was going to beat Sherrod Brown. Think about all of the legislation, all of the confirmations that got by on one vote. Had Josh Mandel not quit that race, then none of that would have made it through, ladies and gentlemen. We wouldn't have had some of these razor tight margins where Pence had to come in and break a tie. I mean, that just would not have happened. And then now when Democrats are passing the legislation they were passing in the first 6 months of Joe Biden's administration, even many of those bills passed with one vote. None of that would have happened. Even with Kamala Harris, it just would not have been enough. And then confirmations. Look, when we get a real fight over the Supreme Court judge right now, you don't ever know what would happen to Mandel, what committee he would have ended up on. I mean, so, it irks. But ultimately, that's not what did it. What did it was that he and Gibbs raised their hand during the question about a no-fly zone. And that we had just polled that, Robert. It was 32% in the state of Ohio want a no-fly zone. That's it. And that, by the way, is without telling people the detriment of a no-fly zone. So it's probably around 18%.
And most of that's coming from Democrats that are never going to vote for either one of them. I mean, it was a massive mistake, them jumping on the war campaign. I think that's why it gave Vance the breakout chance. Plus, in all these debates, Vance just performs much better than me. I mean, these guys were, trying to fight each other at one of the debates. I mean,
Mandel and Gibbs, they were in each other's faces.
And the establishment greatly fears Vance. I mean, people get obsessed with Vance in 2016 not being on the Trump team. I care far more about his policies now, and his policies have been consistently populist, and his opposition to Trump was purely personality driven. And the position he was in at the time, which was not a political position, which was marketing his book and whatnot, with mostly liberal audiences that he was marketing to. So but he's the more instinctive populist. He's proven that throughout the campaign, proven that big time on the war issues that help distinguish him from the rest. I think if he wins the other factor is I think Republicans pick up Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia. So they pick up 3 seats. I see Walker. I don't think that's going to end up being close.
I was just going to say, Robert, we polled that. Do I still have that loaded up here? I may. Crap, I don't. But look, I don't care what these other polls now, they're hurting to us. We had Walker up by 4 real early. He was dominating rural Georgia, of course, but he had a very healthy lead in the suburbs. Everywhere outside of urban Atlanta, he was either winning or had, where Democratic areas, typically a 10-point win for Democrats, he had it tight. So I just don't see how Warnock holds on against Walker. I just don't, man. I think that those polls right now, we even have the Atlanta Journal-Constitution moving to us. They have Walker up by 2 now, and they're one of the worst polls out there. So that probably means that it's closer to 4 or 6. I think that Georgia had a momentary lapse of judgment, and I also think what we found in Georgia was definitive. Yes, the election was going to be closer, but it was probably more like a 2-point win for Trump, to be honest. I'm just being real with you guys. But at the Senate level, Perdue should have been able to hold on against Ossoff. Loeffler should have been able to hold on against Warnock. Our polling was very clear. They did not, because of the positions they took on the recount and on defending Trump in general. Plus, they had their own insider trader issues, which they would not answer to in debates. And then the money, Robert. Remember, they followed McConnell into the dark pit of defeat with that stupid opposition of giving people $2,000 for that month. The dumbest thing you could have done, they did. And 400,000 voters stayed home because of it. They should have not only won, but they should have won that pretty handily. And because you were there, they really thought that it was Donald Trump being on the ballot that was the problem for them, right? You know that. They really believe that. They didn't understand that without Donald Trump on the ballot, Central and South Georgia were not coming out for you. The one rally he did, which was in northern Georgia, there was decent turnout there for Republicans north of Atlanta. And once you got anywhere south of Atlanta and then west of Savannah, you had major turnout problems because those people said, you know what, this time, these people have to be taught a lesson. Do I want a Democrat? No. But I'm not their bitch either. And I'm sick of them they want us to come out and defend them. They never defend us. And I heard it out of the mouth of babes. 2 polls in that month leading up to that election. Those people were pissed. And by the way, people that were running around saying the elections will just be rigged because the machines will just steal it from you, they didn't help either. Because we heard that, it was not dominant like people's anger, for toward their position during the post-election season. That was the dominant reason they stayed home and didn't want to vote. But there were definitely people who said they just believed that the machines with Dominion would just take their vote away. So, I mean, that's why that kind of talk is not helpful. It's not.
Yeah, it was intended in part to have that impact, to get
the
people
left
to
loves
resign.
that.
Yep. But I mean, I think we add at least Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. I think we hold in
Ohio,
Pennsylvania. Definitely hold in Ohio. I think we hold in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the closer races, and then maybe pick up one other place, whether it's a surprise in New Hampshire.
Yeah,
especially if the numbers get up to over 5-6% Republicans in the generic ballot, then states like New Hampshire are completely in play. And most importantly, I think it's going to be a much more populist Senate. If you have voices like J.D. Vance and Blake Masters, I think if Greitens makes it through in Missouri, and he has to get through the Karl Rove smear. But if he's able to get, people should ask themselves, why is this guy targeted so often? Right? You know what I mean? I mean, he's targeted by a Democratic hit machine that turned out to be all based on perjury and lies. Those people have now been subsequently criminally prosecuted to drive him out of the governor's chair. And now there's this, conveniently timed, nuclear, politically nuclear bomb dropped on him. People should wonder about that. But whatever happens there, there'll at least be more populists than there were before. And most importantly, anti-populists that are gone. Because I think Murkowski will be gone. You look at who's being replaced in places like Oklahoma, who's being replaced in Pennsylvania, who's being replaced in some of these other seats in North Carolina. You're getting rid of some of these corrupt deep state advocates and Romneyites, and you're replacing them with much more populist people frequently. Same with replacing Portman, Ohio. So it will be the Republicans will hold the House and will win the House and Senate, I think they'll have solid margins in both, and they'll have the most populist they've ever had. And it will set up well for 2024, whether it's Trump or DeSantis. If Trump does what he needs to do, Trump will be the easy winner. DeSantis, I don't think, even challenges him. If Trump
he won't, Robert. I asked him point blank, and he looked dead. He looked dead, and then looked around so everyone could understand what he was answering. You know what I mean? Like, and he flatly said, "I will not challenge Donald Trump if he seeks to take back his presidency because he believes it was taken from him. He said, if he wants back the White House, I will not challenge the president. Period.
Yeah.
End of story, folks.
That's a smart move.
I mean, everyone needs to just stop with why don't you add Ron DeSantis to your polls? Because one, he's not known well enough to pit in a national election. Number two, he's not freaking doing it. And frankly, he looked a little bit aggravated that he had to answer that question again. It struck me as he's been asked this too many freaking times for it to not be common knowledge. I just wanted it for me and my locals community. You know what I mean? I just wanted it to be completely, without a doubt, shadow of a doubt. Are you running? Would you run? If you know, and he said, Donald Trump, I will not challenge the president. Period.
And that's the smart move for DeSantis.
It is.
And then Trump just needs to improve his operation. Now, if Trump puts DeSantis on a ticket, that will by itself help improve his personnel decisions. But not only his political decisions, but DeSantis would be an actual populist ally inside the White House rather than an adversary like Mike Pence was. And a secret. I mean, also people should look at that Bill Barr book, not only to see what a fraud Bill Barr was all along, but what a fraud Mike Pompeo was all along.
Mike Pompeo, yep.
He's having lunches. By the way, they're sitting there making fun of how they can fool Trump anytime they want. That, you know, Pompeo's routine, anytime Trump was exposing some bad policy of Pompeo that was undermining the Trump administration, was to get Trump to talk about Spygate or something related to it. He suckered him in every single, and then he and Bill Barr would laugh about it. That section of that book should be shared with Trump just so he understands
just
who
so
Mike
he
Pompeo
knows.
was.
Yeah, and
These
yet
people
he comes
laugh
out
at
and
it.
endorses Morgan in Tennessee 5 over Robbie Starbuck. It's incredible to me. Just the process of getting the president's endorsement.
The Tennessee state legislature, though, is passing a law to make it illegal for her to be a candidate.
That's fantastic. I did. Somebody, maybe that's what I. Maybe
there's
that's
some judicial races where they're doing that. They're up to some. They're up to some old fun stuff there in Tennessee.
Tennessee does that. That's how they are, man. Kentucky,
well,
too.
It's a increasingly populous state. They pass laws to prohibit these vaccine mandates, and some of them are being successful. I still have to sue Tyson because Tyson refuses to obey it, but there are other companies that are obeying it in Tennessee. So if the governor, the governor gets to appoint the attorney general, the appointed attorney general should get more populist and go after people like Tyson Foods that are violating the rights of Tennesseans, and he could be even more popular and be in much better shape for his political future there in Tennessee.
Yeah, totally.
But the people that look at the DeSantis example succeed, and more Republicans should look at it gubernatorially. Republicans running for the House or Senate should remember the 1920s and look at how J.D. Vance and Joe Kent and Blake Masters are doing and realizing getting away from the war machine is the much better way to go politically. And Trump's people should look to DeSantis to say, this is how you run an administration, and borrow from it heavily. And particularly if it's DeSantis is ultimately going to be on the ticket, borrow from a lot of his smart political personnel people rather than the old establishment people, because that's the other part that right now Trump is coasting on the fact that Democrats are a disaster. He still needs to make major improvements if his election is going to make the change that he campaigned on.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Last thing before we go, what number are you looking at in the House right now, Robert? Because of redistricting, Republicans had some last-minute wins, but overall, I think they screwed the pooch on a lot of places. Again, more fake fundraising. Democrats want to do this in New Mexico. Help us out. Yet I saw no lawsuit challenging splitting Albuquerque into 3 different. I saw nothing with Portland being carved up into 4 pieces. It's just nuts, ridiculous, very obvious. Attempts to limit your losses in the House. So I think I try to tell people all the time, we're not in a 2010 position. We're not, because Obama had won so big and Democrats had rode his coattails so big. that they won districts they never really had any business winning. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, look, if it's something closer to New Jersey, Robert, then Democrats are going to get killed. I mean, districts will fall that none of us are thinking are going to fall. Right now, I think you got 3 in Texas. They're gone. I think the Democrats are going to get routed in the last strongholds they have in South Texas. And there are obviously other ones, but they cut up New Jersey. So New Jersey 3 now is not the target it once was. You're right. I mean, they did good at this. So what are you thinking? What range are you looking at?
They spent almost a decade preparing for this. So
They did?
I mean, so I have to take a look at what the new dynamics are. How democratic did they make some of these districts from a turnout perspective, from a partisan lean perspective? Recognizing the RNC and the RCCC will make bad choices, because they always do.
They will.
There's that Michigan district where people are discovering that having a CIA person as congresswoman is probably a bad idea, but all depends on who they back. In opposing.
That and Dittmer backed out. He went to the Senate seat instead, which he's going to win. But he went to the state Senate, and when he was the runner-up in 8. And I understand why he did it. His major issue is election integrity, and he wants to be in a place where he can really be effective, at changing state laws. But at this point, he had the "I told you so" campaign. He did,
right?
Which is the winner all the time.
So I mean, there's so many. I think the redistricting issues and candidate limitations, and the fact that almost everybody running these campaigns is incompetent. I mean, the people made fun of in the movie Wag the Dog, they're still running campaigns. Those kind of people don't change horses in this stream. It's that kind of campaign advertisers, those kind of pollsters. I've recommended to the populist candidates that are running have much better pollsters, have much better media people. But I haven't seen a lot of evidence of that so far. So between all of those factors, I'm putting it more on the low end of the scale of 30 to 40 seats. Flipping.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
It could have been with the right campaign, the right redistricting, 70 plus seats flip. But I think it's net 3 in the Senate, maybe up to net 4. The failure to get Sununu to run was really pitiful out of New Hampshire.
That's devastating. Devastating. Yep. Oh yeah, he would have won hands down. Even in a tough election cycle, Sununu could have won that race.
The candidate recruitment in many places was poor. Laxalt's a good candidate recruitment, but a lot of these people that ended up running, it was other populist people pushing them to run that got them in. That got J.D. Vance. It was Peter Thiel saying, "I'm going to set up an independent PAC." Gets Peter Thiel, gets Blake Masters, gets people like that. Populists were pushing for Eric Greitens to get back in. Same with Laxalt in Nevada. It wasn't the institutional Republican Party. Instead they've often opposed some of these people. So
I was just going to say, actually, in a lot of the things we've been working on, I mean, we have to fight them more than they have to fight the Democrats at this point. I mean, that's they're
too many idiots.
Some of it is just some of
I
it's
put
just
this on
hands
Trump.
off.
I mean, Trump could have fixed this and he didn't. And he should have he should have leveraged the opportunity after the election at least to do it. I get why he didn't do it before the election, but after the election and seeing the consequences of it. But he still Trump just cares about marketing and pitching. He does not care about. He doesn't get into the weeds of. He's somebody who can sell a building, but he needs to hire good people to build it, and he hasn't hired good people to build it. And that will probably represent it in what happens in the House and Senate races, and there'll be a lot of missed opportunities, is my guess. So I think Republicans still take it, but not by the margins they should. I think it'll be +3 in the Senate, +30 in the House.
Yeah, look ahead, America. They just put out their report about election reform scorecards for different states. We're gonna have Matt Brainerd on Wednesday on Inside the Numbers to talk about it. Think about how different it would have been, Robert, if Donald Trump would have been out there campaigning for election reform. How much better it would have been in Georgia. Georgia's not a great bill. There's some good provisions, but election reform was not good in Georgia. Texas, they want to roll back some protections. It's incredible. Utah, they completely caved, even though we showed them polling. Overwhelmingly, they've had mail-in voting for a long time, but this time they said we would put convenience on hold if it means integrity. They just, they needed, Donald Trump needed to be out there constantly holding these people's feet to the fire. He didn't do that, and that's where he could have been effective. and he didn't do it. So Republicans simply did not get wins that they should have and could have gotten. I totally agree with that.
Like in runoffs,
legislation of redistricting. Yeah.
In runoffs in Texas, he should absolutely be there for Paxton. Paxton was
without
the guy
a doubt.
who led
He
the
was there
effort
for
to
him.
get the election case up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And instead, we're going to let another Bush into a ranking position of power, little Jorge Bush. I mean, that makes no sense. So Trump is still kind of on the sidelines too much. And right now he's benefiting from the fact that Biden is the worst president maybe we've ever had. And he can probably still benefit that way. But what he won't be able to do is get through much of the agenda that he's campaigning on, unless he really starts to tune up his own campaign organization and the Republican Party makes some of the changes they need. But yeah, I think it's safe to bet on Republicans taking back the House and the Senate. That I would say about 85% chance that takes place.
Yeah, last thing before we tell people, give people the shtick about where to find you, follow you. I need some suggestions about who to throw in as far as the Democratic bench for 2024. I'm open to suggestions. Feel free to send them to me, Robert, because I pitted Trump against Buttigieg. Warren, we're going to add. Harris, Biden, Sanders is getting added.
It'll only be Harris, Buttigieg, or Hillary. That's it.
Hillary. We got to add Hillary. Oh, my goodness. So drop Buttigieg because he's a failure anyway. And he can't run that
It would be one of those three. The only people to replace Biden would be either Harris, Buttigieg, or Hillary. Buttigieg, because he's got a lot of deep state backing. They really love Buttigieg. But he's done nothing in his cabinet position aside from go on vacation because he needed maternity leave.
Trump would destroy him with that alone. He would never let the country forget that while you were watching your ports getting backed up, your gas prices skyrocket, Pete Buttigieg took maternity leave. I mean, he would never let people forget that. All right, Robert, tell people where to follow you and join, your community.
Absolutely. You can get all the exclusive content, post yourself exclusive content at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
There it is, my friend. See you soon. All right.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, and I'll just say real quick before I go, Chris Christie led the redistricting effort for Republicans. So what did you expect? He really is a fall from grace kind of character, and it seems like if he's not using certain tactics to get things done, he can't get things done. I don't know why Republicans repeatedly think former U.S. attorneys should have any handling in election law whatsoever. They're two totally different areas. Totally different area. Makes no sense. But yet, Rudy Giuliani runs the president's, for a while. And when he's not taking ideas from Barnes, he has none of his own. And you have Chris Christie, a former U.S. attorney who thought the world of Bob Mueller for the first 2 years of the Mueller investigation, running the legal effort to defend their positions on redistricting. I mean, it's just total it's just asinine. All right. With that in mind, I'm out. All right. So don't miss it. Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time. Inside the Numbers. Matt Brainerd will join us from Look Ahead America to talk about the scorecard, which I shared with you on Locals already. And of course, we'll be looking to pry his brain on that. Again, what difference could it have made if Donald Trump was out there holding people's feet to the fire? So much to discuss this week, folks. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Follow me right there, peoplespundit.locals.com. You can still find me on GETTR at People's Pundit on GETTR and at Peoples_Pundit on Twitter. All right. Have a good Monday, folks, and we will see you on Wednesday.
Hit the lights that shine down over dotted lines of white across an open highway. Restless nights, coffee houses, clubs and neon lights. I rock the people my way, working my way, coming back to you. Working my way, coming back. Take me home tonight, not wasting any time. the morning light. New York, Boston, Philadelphia, LA, I still see your face. Buses roll, distance grows, but I remember you're just a dream away. Working my